The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Prince William adjusted his tie for the third time. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves about the public appearance, but from something deeper. Kate noticed immediately, her trained eye catching the subtle tension in her husband's shoulders as he stared out the window of their private quarters. "You don't have to do this today," Kate said softly, placing her hand on his arm. "We can reschedule." William shook his head, his jaw set with determination. "No, they're expecting us. These people have been waiting months for this visit." He turned to face her, and Kate saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years, a vulnerability that took her back to their early days together at university. The visit to the children's hospital had been planned for weeks. It was supposed to be a routine royal engagement, the kind they had done hundreds of times before. But this wasn't just any hospital visit. This was the same wing where William had spent countless hours as a young boy, visiting his mother during her secret trips to see sick children. The memories were flooding back now, uninvited and overwhelming. Kate had learned over the years how to read her husband's moods, how to support him without making it obvious to the watching world. She moved closer, straightening his collar with gentle fingers. "She would be proud of you," she whispered, knowing exactly what was weighing on his mind. The drive to the hospital was unusually quiet. Their security detail had cleared the usual route, but William found himself asking the driver to take a longer path. He wasn't ready, not yet. Kate sat beside him, her hand resting on his, offering silent strength. She had her own emotions to manage today, but she pushed them aside. Today was about William, about honoring a memory that still brought him pain even after all these years. As their car pulled up to the hospital entrance, they could see the small crowd that had gathered. Hospital staff, local officials, and a few members of the press waited behind the barriers. But it was the children pressed against the windows of the upper floors that caught Kate's attention. Little faces, some pale from illness, others bright with excitement, all watching for their arrival. William took a deep breath and stepped out of the car first, his public mask sliding perfectly into place. The practiced smile, the confident wave, the easy manner that had taken years to perfect. Kate followed, her own smile genuine as she waved to the children in the windows above. But she kept one eye on her husband, ready to step in if needed. The hospital director, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, greeted them warmly. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years spent caring for others. "Your Royal Highnesses, welcome to St. Mary's Children's Wing. We're absolutely thrilled to have you here today." As they walked through the entrance, William's steps slowed almost imperceptibly. The smell hit him first. That distinctive hospital scent of disinfectant mixed with something else he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe. Or courage. His mother had always said hospitals smelled like bravery. The walls were covered with colorful artwork created by the young patients, handprints in rainbow colors, drawings of families, and messages of hope decorated every available space. Kate paused at one particular drawing, a stick-figure family holding hands under a bright yellow sun. The artist had signed it, Tommy, age 6, in shaky letters. "That's one of our long-term patients," Dr. Mitchell explained, noticing Kate's interest. "He's been with us for 8 months now, such a bright little boy." There was something in her voice, a careful neutrality that both William and Kate recognized. They had heard that tone before, when doctors spoke about children whose futures were uncertain. They were led through a series of corridors, each one bringing back more memories for William. He remembered racing down similar hallways as a boy, trying to keep up with his mother's quick stride. She had always walked fast in hospitals, as if she could outrun the sadness that seemed to cling to these walls. The first stop was the playroom, where a group of children aged 5 to 12 were waiting. They had been told that special visitors were coming, but most were too young to fully understand what it meant to meet the future king and queen. They were simply excited to have new faces to see, new people to show their toys and games. A little girl with a bright pink headscarf came running up to Kate immediately. "Are you a real princess?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Kate knelt down to the child's level, her heart melting at the innocent question. "I am," she said with a warm smile. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" "I'm Emma, and I'm 7, and I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up so I can help people get better," the little girl announced, with the confidence that only children possess. William watched this interaction, feeling some of the tension in his chest begin to ease. This was why they were here, not for the photos or the press coverage, but for moments like this, for Emma, who, despite being in a children's hospital, still dreamed of helping others. More children began to approach, some walking, others in wheelchairs or using mobility aids. Each one had a story, a personality that shone through despite their circumstances. William found himself genuinely laughing for the first time that day as an 8-year-old boy named Marcus showed him how to play a complicated video game. But it was when they moved to the infant ward that William felt his composure truly tested. Through the glass windows of the NICU, tiny babies fought their earliest battles. Some were connected to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. Others slept peacefully in incubators, their small chests rising and falling with determined rhythm. Kate instinctively moved closer to William, sensing his shift in mood. These babies were the same age as their own children had been not so long ago. The thought of any child facing such challenges from the very beginning of life was almost unbearable for any parent to contemplate. Dr. Mitchell guided them to a quieter corner of the ward where they could observe without disturbing the delicate environment. "We have 32 babies currently in our care," she explained quietly. "Some will go home in days, others may be with us for months, but every single one of them is a fighter." As they stood there, watching these tiny warriors continue their battles, neither William nor Kate could have imagined what was waiting for them in the next part of their visit. The scene that would test every ounce of their royal training and emotional strength was still to come. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the 4th floor of the children's wing. Dr. Mitchell stepped out first, followed by William and Kate, their security detail maintaining a respectful distance. The atmosphere here felt different. From the floors below, quieter, more intense, as if the very air carried the weight of deeper struggles. "This is our long-term care unit," Dr. Mitchell explained as they walked down a corridor lined with patient rooms. "These are children who require extended treatment, sometimes lasting months or even years. They become like family to our staff, Kate. Notice the personal touches everywhere, drawings taped to doors, photos of families, small decorations that made the clinical environment feel more like home." Each room they passed told a story of a child fighting a battle much bigger than their small bodies should have to bear. William was unusually quiet, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture Kate recognized as his way of maintaining control. She knew he was thinking about his own children, safe at home, healthy and carefree. The contrast was stark and painful. They stopped at room 412, where Dr. Mitchell knocked gently before pushing the door open. "Sarah, we have some special visitors today," she called softly into the room. The girl sitting propped up in the hospital bed looked to be about 10 years old, though illness had made her appear smaller and more fragile. Her hair was gone, lost, to chemotherapy. But her eyes were bright and alert. She was holding a well-worn book, and Kate could see it was one of the Harry Potter novels. "Your Royal Highnesses," Dr. Mitchell said, "I'd like you to meet Sarah Thompson. Sarah, this is Prince William and Princess Catherine." Sarah's eyes widened, but she didn't seem nervous. Instead, she carefully marked her place in the book and set it aside. "Mum told me you might be coming today," she said, her voice clear. despite her obvious fatigue. "She's gone to get coffee. She'll be so upset she missed you." William stepped forward, his professional demeanor softening immediately. "What are you reading, Sarah?" "Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban," she replied, holding up the book. "It's my favorite. I've read it 6 times already. Mum says I should try other books, but I like this one because Harry doesn't give up, even when everything seems impossible." Kate felt her throat tighten. The simple wisdom of a 10-year-old facing her own impossible situation was more profound than any philosophy she had ever heard. She moved to sit in the chair beside Sarah's bed, noting the various machines and IV lines that connected to the brave little girl. "That's a very good reason to love a book," Kate said, her voice gentle. "Harry is quite brave, isn't he?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "He reminds me of the doctors here. They fight dark wizards too, except the dark wizards are diseases." She paused, then added with startling matter-of-factness, "I have leukemia. That's my dark wizard." William felt something twist in his chest. The casual way this child spoke about her life-threatening illness, turning it into something from a story to make it less frightening, showed a courage that humbled him completely. "How long have you been fighting your dark wizard?" William asked, settling into another chair and abandoning all royal protocol. 14 months, Sarah replied. "But I'm winning. The doctors say my numbers are much better than they were. Mum cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping, but I tell her not to worry. I'm tougher than I look." At that moment, a woman appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was clearly Sarah's mother. They had the same determined chin and bright eyes. When she saw William and Kate, she nearly dropped the coffee cups. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, setting the cups down quickly. "Sarah, why didn't you press the call button? I could have been here to greet—" "It's perfectly fine, Mrs. Thompson," Kate assured her, standing to shake her hand. "Sarah has been a wonderful hostess." Mrs. Thompson, whose name they learned was Helen, was clearly overwhelmed. "I can't believe you're here. Sarah talks about you sometimes, you know. She says you seem like nice people who really care about others." William looked surprised. "She talks about us?" Helen nodded, moving to straighten Sarah's blankets with the automatic movements of a mother who had spent too many months in hospital rooms. "She follows the royal family in the magazines the volunteers bring. But more than that, she reads about your charity work. She says when she grows up she wants to help sick children too." "I'm going to be a doctor," Sarah announced proudly. "But not just any doctor. I want to work in places like this with children who have to fight dark wizards. I'll understand what it's really like." Kate felt tears threaten for the first time that day. The absolute certainty in Sarah's voice when she spoke about her future, not if she recovered, but when, was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "That's a wonderful goal," William said, his voice slightly hoarse. "What's your favorite subject in school?" "I don't go to regular school right now," Sarah explained. "But Mrs. Peterson comes here 3 times a week to teach me. I love science, because it helps me understand what the medicines are doing in my body. And I love reading because books take me anywhere I want to go." Helen Thompson sat down heavily in the remaining chair, and Kate could see the exhaustion that lived permanently in her features. This woman had been living in crisis mode for over a year, watching her child fight for her life while trying to maintain hope and normalcy. "How are you holding up, Mrs. Thompson?" Kate asked quietly. Helen's composure wavered for just a moment. "Some days are harder than others," she admitted. "But Sarah keeps me strong. She's the bravest person I know." "Mom worries too much," Sarah said, reaching for her mother's hand. "I tell her that worry is just fear wearing a disguise, and fear doesn't help anyone get better." William stared at this remarkable child, wondering where such wisdom came from. At 10 years old, Sarah Thompson had learned lessons about courage and hope that many adults never mastered. They spent another 20 minutes in Sarah's room talking about books, about her treatment, about her dreams for the future. Sarah showed them drawings she had made for other patients, colorful pictures with messages of encouragement. She had created an entire series of superhero patients, stick figures with capes flying through hospital corridors, fighting various villain diseases. When it came time to leave, Sarah surprised them both by asking for hugs instead of handshakes. As Kate embraced the fragile child, she felt Sarah whisper in her ear, "Don't be sad for me. I'm going to be okay. I can feel it." Walking. Back down the corridor, neither William nor Kate spoke immediately. They were both processing what they had just experienced, the profound impact of meeting someone so young who faced such enormous challenges with such grace. But their visit was far from over. Dr. Mitchell was leading them toward another section of the ward, where an even more unexpected and emotional encounter awaited them. Nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to witness in the room at the end of the hall. As they approached the end of the corridor, Dr. Mitchell slowed her pace and turned to face William and Kate. Her expression had grown more serious, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a mixture of anticipation and concern. "Before we go into this next room," she said quietly, "I need to prepare you for what you're going to see. This is perhaps the most unusual situation we've ever had in our ward, and it's something that has touched every single member of our staff." William and Kate exchanged glances, both wondering what could possibly be more emotionally challenging than what they had already witnessed. Kate reached instinctively for William's hand, a gesture so natural that she didn't even realize she had done it. "Room 418 houses our most unique patient," Dr. Mitchell continued. "His name is James, and he's 8 years old. He's been with us for 6 months, which isn't unusual in itself. What makes James special is that he has become the unofficial guardian angel of this entire ward." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "James has a rare condition that requires him to be here for extended periods, but between his treatments, he's quite mobile. He's taken it upon himself to become a friend, companion, and source of comfort for every other child on this floor. The staff calls him our little ambassador." Kate felt her heart already beginning to respond to a story she hadn't even heard yet. "What kind of condition does he have?" Without going into too much medical detail, James has a complex immune disorder that requires ongoing treatment and monitoring. He's been in and out of hospitals most of his life, which has made him wise beyond his years about how to navigate this environment and how to help others cope with being here. Dr. Mitchell began walking again, leading them toward the room at the very end of the hall. "What you're about to witness is something that happens every single day, but it never loses its power to move us. James has created something beautiful here, something that has changed the entire culture of our ward." As they drew closer to room 418, they began to hear something unexpected. The sound of multiple children's voices, some laughing, some talking quietly, some singing. It was clear that whatever was happening in that room involved more than just one patient. Dr. Mitchell knocked gently on the door frame and called out, "James, we have some visitors who would like to meet you and your friends." A young voice called back, "Come in. We're just finishing our story circle." The scene that greeted William and Kate as they entered the room was unlike anything they had ever encountered in any of their royal visits. The room had been transformed into something that looked more like a cozy living room than a hospital room. James, a slight boy with dark hair and bright, intelligent eyes, was sitting cross-legged on his bed, which had been positioned in the center of the room. Arranged around him, some in chairs, some in wheelchairs, and some sitting on the floor with pillows, were 7 other children of various ages. What struck William immediately was the atmosphere in the room. Despite being in a children's hospital ward, despite the medical equipment visible in the background, despite the obvious signs of illness that marked several of the children, the room was filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine happiness. "Your Royal Highnesses," James said, standing up on his bed with a slight bow that was both respectful and charmingly irreverent. "Welcome to our daily story circle. I'm James, and these are my friends." He proceeded to introduce each child by name, along with a brief description of something special about them that had nothing to do with their medical conditions. "This is Lucy, who knows more jokes than anyone I've ever met. This is Michael, who can draw better than most adults. This is Emma, not the Emma you met downstairs, a different Emma, who teaches us origami. This is David, who's going to be a professional football player someday." Kate was amazed at how James presented each child, not as a patient with an illness, but as a complete person with talents, dreams, and personality. It was clear that he had worked hard to create an environment where being sick was not the most important thing about anyone. "We were just finishing a story," James explained. "Would you like to hear the end? It's one I made up about a kingdom where everyone has a special power, but some people's powers are hidden and they have to discover what they are." William found himself nodding, completely drawn into this unusual scene. He and Kate sat down on the small couch that had somehow been brought into the room, and James resumed his story. "So Princess Courage had been searching everywhere for her special power," James continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a natural storyteller. "She had tried everything, flying, magic spells, talking to animals, but nothing worked. She felt useless compared to all the other people in the kingdom who had obvious powers." The other children were listening intently, even though it was clear they had heard James tell stories many times before. Kate noticed that several of them were unconsciously leaning forward, completely absorbed in the narrative. But then one day, Princess Courage was walking through the kingdom when she saw that everyone was sad and scared because a great darkness had fallen over the land. People were hiding in their homes, afraid to come out, afraid to talk to each other, afraid to hope. James's voice grew more animated as he reached the climax of his story. Princess Courage realized that even though she couldn't fly or do magic spells, she wasn't afraid. And because she wasn't afraid, she could help other people not be afraid too. So she went from house to house, knocking on doors, getting people to come outside, reminding them of all the good things in their kingdom. William felt something stir in his chest as he listened to this 8-year-old boy weave a tale that was clearly about much more than a fictional princess. "And that's when Princess Courage discovered her special power," James concluded. "Her power was helping other people find their courage when they had lost it. It wasn't flashy like flying or magic, but it was the most important power of all, because it helped everyone else's powers work better." The room erupted in applause, and Kate found herself clapping along with genuine enthusiasm. The story was simple but profound, and she realized that James had been describing exactly what he did every day in this hospital ward. "That was wonderful, James," Kate said. "Do you write all your own stories?" James nodded proudly. "I write them down in this notebook," he said, pulling out a thick journal that was clearly well used. "Dr. Mitchell gave it to me when I first got here, and now it's almost full. I write stories for different kids depending on what they need to hear." "What do you mean?" William asked, genuinely curious. "Well," James explained with the matter-of-fact tone that children often use when discussing complex emotional concepts, "like when someone first gets here and they're really scared, I tell them stories about characters who are scared at first, but then discover they're braver than they thought. Or when someone's been here a long time and they're getting sad, I tell stories about patience and how good things come to people who wait." Kate felt tears threatening for the second time that day. This child had created his own form of therapy, not just for himself, but for every other child who ended up in this ward. But James wasn't finished surprising them yet. What he did next would create the emotional scene that neither William nor Kate would ever forget. James set down his story notebook and looked directly at William with an expression that seemed far too mature for his 8 years. "Prince William," he said quietly, "I know why you're really here today." The room fell silent. The other children sensed that something important was happening, though they couldn't quite understand what. Dr. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably, clearly not having expected this turn in the conversation. William felt his breath catch. "What do you mean, James?" James climbed down from his bed and walked over to where William was sitting. Despite his small stature and the obvious signs of his long illness, there was something remarkably dignified about the way he moved. "My mum told me about your mum," James said simply. "She told me that your mum used to come to hospitals like this one, and that she died when you were young. And that's part of why being in hospitals sometimes makes you sad." Kate felt William tense beside her. This was not the kind of conversation they had expected to have with an 8-year-old patient, and she could see that William was struggling with how to respond. But James wasn't finished. "I want to show you something," he said, walking over to a small table by the window. He picked up a folder that Kate hadn't noticed before and brought it back to William. "What's this?" William asked, his voice carefully controlled. "These are letters," James explained. "Letters from kids who used to be patients here, and letters from their families. Dr. Mitchell helped me start collecting them when I realized that sometimes people leave here and we never know what happens to them." He opened the folder carefully, revealing pages and pages of handwritten notes, typed letters, photographs, and drawings. "Look," he said, pointing to the first letter. "This is from Amy. She was here for 3 months last year. She had the same thing as Sarah, leukemia. She went home 6 months ago, and now she's back in regular school and she plays football." James turned the page. "And this is from Tommy's family. Remember Tommy who drew that picture you looked at downstairs? He had surgery on his heart, and now he's completely healthy. His mum sent this picture of him at his school's sports day." Page after page, James showed them evidence of children who had come through this ward, fought their battles, and gone on to live full, healthy lives. With each story, his voice grew more animated, more confident. "The thing is," James said, looking up at William, "I think your mum would want you to know that the sad stories aren't the only stories. There are happy endings, too. Lots and lots of them." William stared at this remarkable child, feeling something shift inside his chest. For years, hospitals had represented loss to him. The loss of his mother, the reminder of suffering, the place where hope went to die. But James was showing him something different. "How do you know so much about my mother?" William asked gently. "I asked Dr. Mitchell to tell me," James replied honestly. "When she said you were coming to visit, I wanted to understand. I do that with all the new kids, too. I try to understand their stories so I can help them better." Kate watched this exchange with amazement. This 8-year-old boy had displayed more emotional intelligence and empathy than many adults she had met. He had somehow intuited that William needed healing just as much as any patient in this ward. James closed the folder and sat down on the floor in front of William's chair. "Would you like to hear about my favorite happy ending?" he asked. William nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. "There was a boy named Marcus who was here when I first arrived 6 months ago," James began. "He was 12, and he was really angry about being sick. He wouldn't talk to anyone, wouldn't join our story circles, wouldn't even let his parents visit very often because he said it was too hard for everyone." The other children in the room had settled back into their chairs and pillows, clearly having heard this story before but still eager to listen. Marcus had something wrong with his kidneys, and he needed a transplant. But he had convinced himself that he was going to die, and that there was no point in hoping or trying or caring about anything. James's voice took on the same storytelling cadence he had used for his fictional tale, but Kate could tell this story was completely true. "So I started telling him stories every day, even though he pretended not to listen. I would sit outside his room and tell stories about characters who thought they were doomed, but who ended up saving the day. I told him stories about heroes who didn't know they were heroes yet. William found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in James's narrative. It took 3 weeks, but finally Marcus asked me to come into his room to tell the stories instead of standing in the hallway. And then one day, he asked me to teach him how to write stories, too. James smiled at the memory. Marcus started writing stories about a boy who was waiting for a new kidney, but instead of being scared, the boy in the stories was preparing to be the best kidney receiver ever. He wrote stories about all the things he was going to do once he was healthy again. Kate felt her throat tighten as she began to understand where this story was leading. Marcus got his transplant 4 months ago, James continued. And last week, he sent me this. James pulled out a photograph from the back of the folder. It showed a healthy-looking 12-year-old boy in a football uniform holding a trophy and grinning widely. He made his school's football team, James announced proudly, and he wrote me a letter saying that learning to tell stories about hope helped him believe that hope was possible. The room was completely silent, except for the distant sounds of the hospital. Machines beeping, footsteps in the corridor, the quiet conversations of medical staff. But in room 418, everyone was focused on the profound truth that an 8-year-old boy had just shared. William looked at the photograph of Marcus, then at James, then at all the other children who were watching this interaction with the understanding that something important was happening, even if they couldn't fully grasp what it was. "James," William said quietly, "I think you might be the wisest person I've ever met." James shook his head seriously. "I'm not wise," he said. "I just pay attention. And I've learned that if you're going to be stuck somewhere hard, you might as well try to make it better for everyone else who's stuck there too." It was at that moment that Kate realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. Not just the conversation between her husband and this remarkable child, but the transformation happening in William's face. The tension that had been there all day was slowly melting away, replaced by something she hadn't seen in his eyes in years when it came to hospitals and illness and loss. But James had one more surprise for them, something that would create the scene that neither William nor Kate would ever be able to forget. James stood up suddenly, his eyes brightening with an idea that seemed to have just occurred to him. "Wait here," he said to William and Kate. "I have something to show you, but I need to get everyone together first." He walked over to a small intercom system on the wall, something Kate hadn't noticed before, but which clearly allowed communication between rooms on the ward. James pressed the button and spoke into it with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. "Attention. Everyone on the 4th floor," his young voice echoed through the speaker system. "This is James in room 418. We have very special visitors today, and I need everyone who can to come to the big room at the end of the hall. If you can't walk, ask a nurse to help you. If you're too sick to move, that's okay. We'll bring the magic to you later." Dr. Mitchell looked surprised. "James, what are you planning?" James grinned at her with the kind of mischievous expression that reminded everyone he was still very much a child, despite his mature insights. "You'll see," he said. "But trust me, it's something good." Over the next few minutes, something remarkable began to happen. Children started appearing in the hallway outside room 418, some walking on their own, others being pushed in wheelchairs by nurses or family members. Kate watched in amazement as what seemed like every mobile patient on the floor made their way toward them. There was Sarah from room 412, wrapped in a colorful blanket and being pushed in a wheelchair by her mother Helen. There were children. Kate and William had met earlier, and many they hadn't. Some were completely bald from chemotherapy, others had various medical devices attached to them, some looked relatively healthy while others were clearly quite ill. But all of them had the same expression on their faces: excitement and anticipation. "What's happening?" William asked James quietly. "Something we've never done before," James replied, "but something I think needs to happen." The children gathered in the large common area at the end of the hall, which Kate now realized was much bigger than she had initially thought. Hospital, Staff appeared with extra chairs and pillows, clearly accustomed to James's impromptu gatherings, but surprised by the scale of this one. When everyone was settled, James walked to the center of the group. Despite being one of the smallest children present, he commanded the attention of everyone in the room, patients, families, medical staff, and royalty alike. "My friends," James began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Today we have Prince William and Princess Catherine visiting us. But more than that, we have two people here who understand something important about sadness and healing and hope." Kate felt William's hand find hers as they sat among this group of brave children and their families. "I want to tell you all a story," James continued. "But this time, it's not a story I made up. This is a true story about someone I never met, but someone I feel like I know very well." The room fell completely silent. Even the youngest children seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. "Once upon a time," James began, using his storyteller's voice, "there was a princess who loved children very much. This princess didn't have magic powers like in fairy tales, but she had something even better. She had a heart that could see when people were hurting, and she always knew how to make them feel less alone." Kate felt her breath catch as she realized James was talking about Diana. "This princess used to come to hospitals like this one," James continued. "Not because she had to for her job, but because she wanted to. She would sit with children who were scared, and hold babies who needed love, and listen to teenagers who felt like nobody understood them." William's grip on Kate's hand tightened, but his eyes never left James's face. The princess taught many people that being sad or sick or different didn't make you less important. She showed everyone that every person deserves to be seen and heard and loved, no matter what they're going through. James paused, looking directly at William. "And even though this princess died when she was still young, the love she gave to people didn't die with her. It kept growing and spreading, and it taught her sons that caring for others is one of the most important things anyone can do." The room was so quiet that Kate could hear her own heartbeat. Several of the adult family members were wiping tears from their eyes, and even some of the medical staff looked emotional. "So today," James said, his voice growing stronger, "I want to show Prince William and Princess Catherine something that I think his mother would have loved to see." James gestured to all the children around the room. "Everyone here has a story about fighting something hard. Everyone here has had days when they felt scared or sad or alone. But look around this room." Kate did look around, and what she saw was extraordinary. Despite being in a children's hospital ward, despite the medical equipment and the obvious signs of serious illness, the room was filled with something indefinable but unmistakable. Hope, resilience, community, love. "We take care of each other. Here," James continued. "When someone is having a bad day, the rest of us help them remember they're not alone. When someone gets good news, we all celebrate together. When someone has to say goodbye because they're going home healthy, we cheer. And when someone has to say goodbye for a different reason, we make sure they know they mattered." James walked over to a large poster board that was mounted on the wall, something Kate hadn't noticed before because it had been partially hidden behind a group of chairs. As James moved the chairs aside, the poster became visible, and Kate gasped softly. It was covered with hundreds of handprints in different colors, each one labeled with a name and date. But it wasn't just the handprints that made it special. Around each print, in children's handwriting, were messages of hope, encouragement, and love. "Every child who comes through this ward leaves their handprint here," James explained. "But more than that, they leave a message for the children who will come after them. Messages about not giving up, about finding courage, about remembering that they're loved." He pointed to various handprints as he spoke. "This blue one is Marcus's. Remember Marcus with the kidney transplant? His message says, 'Your story isn't over yet.' This pink one is from a girl named Rebecca who was here 2 years ago. Her message says, You are braver than you believe." William stood up slowly and walked closer to the poster. As he read message after message, Kate could see his composure beginning to waver. These weren't generic inspirational quotes. They were personal, heartfelt messages from children who had faced their darkest fears and wanted to help others do the same. "James," William said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is incredible." But James wasn't finished. He walked over to a small table and picked up a container of washable paint and a clean piece of paper. "Princess Catherine, Prince William," he said formally, "would you be willing to add your handprints to our wall? Not because you're royal, but because you came here today, and you listened to our stories, and you showed us that you care about children like us." The request was so simple, yet so profound. Kate felt tears she had been holding back all day finally begin to fall. This wasn't about ceremony or protocol or royal duty. This was about connection, about being part of something larger than themselves. "We would be honored," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. James beamed and began preparing the paint. But as William and Kate stepped forward to make their handprints, something even more extraordinary happened. One by one, every child in the room began to stand up. Those who could stand. Those in wheelchairs sat up straighter. Those who were too weak to move much lifted their heads higher. And then, spontaneously, without any prompting from James or anyone else, they began to applaud. It started with just a few children clapping. But within moments, the entire room erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite, formal applause that William and Kate were accustomed to at royal events. This was something entirely different. It was joyful, grateful, and deeply emotional. William pressed his hand into the blue paint and then onto the paper. He felt something he had never experienced before in a hospital setting. Instead of sadness, instead of the painful memories of loss, he felt hope. He felt the presence of healing, not just for the children around him, but for himself. Kate added her handprint next to William's, and as she did, she looked around the room at all these incredible children and their families, at the medical staff who cared for them, at James who had somehow orchestrated this perfect moment of connection. The applause continued, growing louder and more enthusiastic. Some of the children were cheering now, others were laughing through their tears. The sound filled the entire ward, and Kate was certain it could be heard throughout the hospital. But it was what happened next that created the scene that would stay with William and Kate for the rest of their lives. The moment that would finally heal something in William's heart that had been broken for decades. As the applause began to die down, James raised his small hand, and the room gradually became quiet again. He looked at William and Kate, their handprints still drying on the paper, and his expression grew serious once more. "There's one more thing," James said quietly. "Something I've been saving for the right moment, and I think that moment is now." He walked over to his bed and reached underneath, pulling out a wrapped package that looked like it had been carefully prepared and hidden away. Kate noticed that several of the medical staff exchanged knowing glances. Clearly, they had been aware of whatever James had planned. "6 months ago, when I first came to this ward," James began, walking back to the center of the room, "Dr. Mitchell told me about all the important people who had visited here over the years. She told me about doctors and politicians and celebrities. But the person she talked about most was your mother, Prince William." William felt his heart begin to race, unsure of what was coming but sensing it would be significant. "Dr. Mitchell said that your mother was the most natural visitor they had ever had. She said that Princess Diana didn't just come here to be seen or to fulfill an obligation. She came because she genuinely loved spending time with children, especially children who needed extra care and attention." James carefully began unwrapping the package as he spoke. "So I asked Dr. Mitchell if she had any pictures or memories from those visits, because I wanted to understand what made your mother so special." As the wrapping paper fell away, Kate could see that the package contained a photo album. clearly old with a worn leather cover that spoke of years of careful handling. "Dr. Mitchell gave me this," James said, holding up the album. "It's a collection of photographs from your mother's visits here, but it's more than that. It's also full of letters and drawings that children made for her over the years, and stories that the medical staff wrote down about the things she said and did." William's composure finally began to crack. He had seen official photographs from his mother's hospital visits, but this was something different, something personal and intimate that he had never known existed. "Would you like to see?" James asked gently. William nodded, not trusting his voice. James carried the album over and sat down on the floor at William's feet, opening it carefully to the first page. The photograph that greeted them took William's breath away. It was a candid shot of Princess Diana sitting cross-legged on a hospital bed, surrounded by 6 children of various ages, all of them laughing at something she had just said. Her face was radiant with genuine joy, and it was clear that this moment had been captured spontaneously, not posed for the cameras. This was taken 12 years ago, Dr. Mitchell said softly, moving closer so she could see the album too. "Your mother had been visiting for about 2 hours, and she had completely forgotten that there were any photographers present. She was just being herself." James turned the page, revealing more photographs. Diana reading stories, Diana helping, children with art projects, Diana simply holding hands with a young patient who looked scared and alone. In every single picture, her attention was completely focused on the child she was with, as if nothing else in the world mattered in that moment. "But here's my favorite part," James said, turning to a section of the album that was filled with children's drawings and handwritten notes. "These are things that kids made for your mother, and she kept every single one." William leaned closer, reading the innocent messages that children had written to his mother years before he was even born. "Thank you for making me laugh when I was sad. You are the nicest princess in the world. I hope you visit me again soon." But it was the next page that truly broke William's composure. It was a drawing clearly made by a very young child, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with words written in shaky letters. "For Princess Diana, who makes everything better. Love, Tommy, age 5. Tommy grew up, Dr. Mitchell said, quietly. "He's 23 now, married, with a little boy of his own. But he still remembers the day your mother spent an entire afternoon teaching him how to fold paper airplanes when he was too sick to get out of bed." James turned more pages, each one revealing new evidence of the profound impact Diana had made on individual children. There were thank you letters from parents, poems written by teenage patients, and even a few pages of observations written by medical staff about the way Diana's visits changed the entire atmosphere of the ward. She had this gift, one nurse had written, of making every child feel like they were the most important person in the room. She never seemed to be in a hurry, never seemed to be thinking about anything other than the child in front of her. Kate watched her husband's face as he absorbed these intimate glimpses into his mother's hospital visits. She could see years of grief and sadness beginning to transform into something else. Pride, gratitude, and a deep understanding of the legacy his mother had left behind. "James," William said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "how did you know I needed to see this?" James closed the album gently and looked up at William with those wise 8-year-old eyes. "Because," he said simply, "I could tell that hospitals made you think about losing your mom, but I wanted you to see that hospitals were also where your mom was most herself, most happy, most able to help people. She didn't just visit sick children because she had to. She did it because it filled her heart." The room was completely silent now, everyone understanding that they were witnessing something profound and deeply personal. "Your mother taught all of us something important," James continued. "She showed us that when people are going through hard things, the most powerful gift you can give them is your complete attention, your genuine care, and your belief that they matter. William looked around the room at all the children who had gathered for this impromptu ceremony. He saw Sarah with her bright eyes and her Harry Potter book, determined to fight her own dark wizard. He saw the children from the story circle, who had learned from James that their illnesses were not the most important things about them. He saw teenagers and toddlers, children with visible illnesses and others whose struggles were hidden, all of them part of this remarkable community that James had helped create. And suddenly, William understood something that had eluded him for decades. Hospitals were not just places of sadness and loss. They were also places of courage, hope, healing, and love. They were places where ordinary people, doctors, nurses, patients, families, and even young princes and princesses could become their very best selves by caring for others. Tears were now streaming down William's face, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude, of healing, of profound understanding. "Thank you," he whispered to James, his voice breaking. "Thank you for showing me what my mother really left behind." James stood up and, without any regard for royal protocol, wrapped his thin arms around William in a fierce hug. "Your mum would be proud of you," he whispered in William's ear. "And I think she would want you to know that every time you help someone else, she's still helping people too." As William held this remarkable 8-year-old boy, surrounded by dozens of other brave children and their families, he felt something shift in his heart that he had thought was permanently broken. The fear and sadness he had carried about hospitals for so many years began to transform into something entirely different. A desire to continue his mother's work, to honor her memory not through grief, but through action. Kate, watching this extraordinary scene unfold, felt her own tears flowing freely. She had just witnessed her husband's healing happen in real time, facilitated by the wisdom and compassion of a child who understood better than most adults what it meant to turn suffering into service. The applause that erupted this time was different from before. It was quieter, more reverent, but no less heartfelt. It was the sound of people recognizing that they had just witnessed something sacred, something that would stay with all of them forever. As William and Kate prepared to leave the ward that day, they carried with them not just memories of remarkable children and dedicated medical staff, but a completely transformed understanding of what it meant to serve others, to honor loss through love, and to find hope in the most unexpected places. The unexpected, emotional scene they had encountered, orchestrated by an 8-year-old boy with the wisdom of someone much older, had given them far more than they had come to give. They left with their hearts full, their purpose renewed, and their faith in the power of human resilience stronger than ever before.